I'm going to be using lots and lots of fun techniques, and I'm also going to show you how to rescue your paintings if they go a little bit wrong. So I'm mixing up a wash of cerulean blue. I've wet the background, and I'm just going to let you into a little secret about this painting. I did a beautiful sky, beautiful foreground washes, and realised I hadn't actually switched the camera on. So this is actually my second attempt. In a way, this was fortuitous because it led me to tell you that when you go wrong with your skies or anything like that in the first stage of watercolour painting, you can just wash it all off and start again. Now I'm mixing up here some lemon yellow with actually my palette was a little bit dirty anyway, but some green underneath. But you can use lemon yellow and ultramarine and cerulean blue. And I'm also using a bit of quinacridone gold here. If you don't have any of that colour, you can use raw sienna or yellow ochre. Either one will be just as good. But I do love quinacridone gold because it's got a little bit more oomph. It's got a bit more warmth. If you want that warmth, you can always put a little bit of burnt sienna with it as well. So I'm using a little bit of Prussian blue now, along with the quinacridone gold, and it's quite a creamy wash. So I'm painting this now into my painting, which is quite wet, but the paint is what I describe as damp. So it doesn't run away, it doesn't spread into your underpainting. So I'm actually painting this with my size 8 sable round brush, but you can use a synthetic brush, and I'm just painting these long grasses, and this colour now was very thick and creamy at the bottom, and I'm using my twig. It's just an ordinary twig I've sharpened with a pencil sharpener, and I'm just scoring and scratching into the paper using this dark paint and to make really thin grasses. And this, remember, this is all wet in wet. Because the paint wasn't moving enough, I've actually decided to really give it a good tilt to get it sort of running down, and I'm using my spritzer bottle here just to spray the paint, just to get it moving a little bit more. So if you find the paint's not moving, give it a little spray. If you find your paint is drying very quickly, give it a little spray. And as you can see, I'm mopping up now the paint. You don't want that to seep back into your painting later. I'm using sea salt now. You can use ordinary table salt, and I've sprinkled it over my wet painting, and I've used a time lapse now just to show you what the salt does. Can you see that, the way it's soaking up the paint, and you're getting all these beautiful textures? So once it's dried, as you can see now, brush it off with kitchen towel, and you've just sort of revealed all this beautiful texture. I'm going to be taking the masking fluid off now. As you can see there, I was using framing tape, a piece of framing tape. I've got it flat to the paper and I'm rubbing it off. And as you can see, here's the masking fluid on the tape. If you don't have any framing tape, you could use masking tape, or you can use your thumb or an eraser. It's up to you. So I'm just rubbing this all off now. I find the tape works quite well because you don't have all those bits of masking fluid everywhere, and it just all comes off nicely on the tape. So I've just really making sure I get all the bits of masking fluid off. And here we are, all the masking fluid taken off, or so I thought, because I've actually missed 2 at the bottom there, and that you'll see, I'll find out later. So I'm mixing up some lemon yellow, bit of cadmium yellow, touch of red to make a lovely orangey colour. So I've got 2 colours here. I've got the yellow and the orangey colour, and I'm painting the centre of the flowers wet on dry. And I'm just dropping in now the orangey colour wet on wet. So here we are, put on the yellow. It's up to you how many flowers you want to do that with, but I could advise you, if you find it's drying too quickly, do 1 at a time. If you're a bit quicker and it's not drying so quickly, 3 at a time, and then you can drop your orangey colour in. So it's up to you. I mean, you could be in a very warm room and it could be drying ever so quickly. So you decide on when it's wet in wet and when you drop that orangey colour in. So now here I am now, I'm dropping it in just at the base of that center of the flower, so it just sort of blends in nicely. I've slowed the film down for you here just so you can really see that process. The paint's quite creamy, as you saw there, so it doesn't run as much, so it stays put. So you can see there what I'm doing there, it just stays, so you get the light lemony color at the top of the flower, the light's coming from, with a little tiny touches of shadow at the bottom there. but I will be working on this centre of the flower more later in this video. You can do this same sort of process if you were painting daisies or any sort of light coloured flowers. It's quite nice to do. A useful tip I'd like to share with you, and I get a lot of questions about this, is about paintings drying very quickly and, you know, sort of trying to keep up with that. Always prepare your washes beforehand if you are in any fear of that, because it gives you more time then, because you don't have to be mixing washes and you can just be painting. But if it does dry, always give it a little spray as well. That really helps. So I'm mixing up a limey green now. I'm mixing the yellow with some blue. You can use the cerulean here, and just painting in some of these stems in a lovely limey green colour. And I'm using a small size 4 pointed sable brush, but any small detailer brush will be absolutely fine. If you're worried about the sort of delicacy and intricacy of this, you could actually use the twig and put a blob of paint, not a blob, but a bit of watery paint at the end of the twig, and then draw the stems with the twig. That works quite well as well. And if there's something like, I've just washed off there one that it just looked a bit heavy, so you can just lift that off. Here you see I've spotted now, I've actually got those 2 flowers in the bottom there I missed. So I'm just painting again, the process of painting the yellow, the light yellow, and then putting the thicker, creamier, sunnier yellow in the bottom bit of the center there. I'm actually putting in some little leaves now. I've used the lighter green. I'm making a darker green, adding a bit more ultramarine, and the paint is a slightly creamier as well. So it just gives that little bit of contrast with the light green and then the dark green. So I'm just putting those on. I'm pressing my brush down, then lifting it off, and then you get that sort of more point at the end of the leaf. And I'm mixing a very dark green here now. So it's got a little bit of Windsor blue, or you could use Prussian blue, and just putting in some extremely dark greens in the shadowy areas at the bottom of the painting. Try not to be too scared putting darks in. You need darks to make your lights look good. Otherwise, the painting's going to look flat. So just go for it. This is a really shadowy colour. I've literally used a touch of ultramarine with a tiny touch of pink. Very, very watery. I don't want too much shadow on here. This is quite a decorative painting. It's a pretty painting. So you want to end up with white petals and not grey petals. And it's easily done, trust me. So just discipline yourself to leave literally some petals completely white. What I've done as well is I'm putting on the sort of shadowy colour, and then I'm actually getting some clean water and then softening that colour so it doesn't sort of jump out at you too much. You want the illusion of white petals. What I've used here now is a touch of red, tiny touch of red, tiny touch of burnt sienna. This the paint is still damp, so it's damp into damp. Now I'm using a little bit of alizarin crimson, and I just want to put a little bit of texture in the center of those flowers. The paint is almost dry, if that makes any sense. It's almost straight from the tube. I don't want it to bleed too much, otherwise I'm going to have sort of red centers for my flowers. I want to keep that lovely light sunny yellow there. So I'm using a really small detailer brush. It's a synthetic brush, and I'm just putting in the sort of edges around that center to really pop it out. And it can be dry as well. My paint is slightly damp, but it can be dry. Now I'm a little bit worried about that bottom right hand flower. It looks a bit messy, so I'll talk about that later, but I'm giving my painting a spatter with some yellow paint. And now I've actually got my tube of white paint, squeezed it out on the side there, and I'm spattering some white paint to give the illusion of lots of white wild flowers. I'm also going to be using this white paint to get some of the white back on my petals. These couple at the bottom there got a little bit muddy, especially because the masking fluid didn't come off very well. I'm now putting in some more detail on the foliage, on all the leaves, just to give a little bit more detail, putting a few more stems in, and I'm giving another spatter. You know I love to spatter, really do. I find it's very creative, it's a way I express myself really in the painting, and it gives lots of lovely detail. Now I'm taking off the masking tape, or I'm using framing tape. Love using the tapes. I love this white border edge it gives you, and it gives you an objective view. So I've now decided to go back in to the center of these paintings because as they dried, as you find in watercolor, the tonal values, they fade back a bit. So I want to put a little bit more oomph to these to really pop out the center of these flowers and to make the white petals look even whiter with the contrast with the dark against light. I'm using burnt sienna with the alizarin crimson. I'm also using this very small detailing brush here and just concentrating on the main bigger flowers to put the most of the texture in, so they sort of come forward. So I'm very delicately sort of using the tip of the brush, and now I'm sort of painting some of the little gaps between the petals, some of the darks in there. So just concentrating on these main sort of, as I call them, the stars of the show. And then the other smaller flowers will be the supporting cast. And then you'll have the very smaller ones that go in the distance. They're like the extras. So that's how I give them the attention. I know that, you know, that's sort of a weird way of putting it, but it's kind of, it's a way of, it disciplines me not to put detail on every single flower. I'm actually using, as you can see here, paint straight from the tube. So it's thick and creamy to get some of the light back on these petals. They still look a little bit muddy in areas. So in a way, it's not the traditional way of painting in watercolor, but it's how you can rescue your painting sometimes. You don't actually have to use white on its own. You can actually mix it with another color to make like a pale blue or a pale pink, whatever you need. As you notice here, I'm actually putting a few more petals on because they looked a little bit sort of sparse, and I felt like they needed filling out more to make them look prettier as well. And the beauty of the white gouache, it's much more opaque than white watercolor paint, which is more transparent. So it really covers well here. It goes over that green in the background. And I think it really works well. And these little ones here, I just felt they really sort of almost disappeared. So I really do recommend getting yourself a little bit of tube of white gouache just to rescue your paintings if they do go a little bit wrong. I do like to put a mount around my pictures just again to give me an objective point of view. Do I need to do any more? I'm actually quite pleased with that. It's a really pretty, loose painting. I really hope you've learned something from it. Just sort of simple washes, just the masking out, and tips on how to rescue your paintings if you need to. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you'd like to learn more about watercolour, get access to exclusive videos and downloadable outline sketches, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about that can be found in the description below, and you can cancel anytime. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.